So that song is by a wonderful friend of mine who recently died this summer, and who is, if you live in Nashville, as I have done, you live there are music people all around you, and he was a writer of songs, many of which became #1 hits, and I'll come back to that song at the end of my talk. But I first want to thank Ava and Mats and my good dear friend Runa Simonsen for bringing me into this international relationship, which started in 1999 and has grown and grown and been increasingly important to me. So let's talk. Yes, so I'm not going to show you any statistical charts, but anyway, so let me just say that at least in some parts of the world, our expectations for children are changing. When I went to kindergarten, a very long time ago, I was in a working class area of Atlanta, Georgia, in the south of the US, and we sat around in a circle, and our teacher taught us to breathe through our noses. It's a true story. I couldn't make this up. We closed our mouths and practiced breathing through our noses. I told this story actually at a Surgeon General's conference in Washington, D.C. It was not well received by a lot of people, but the next day, the physician from Harvard sent me this picture. Mouth breathing means adenoids. Adenoids means deadened intellect. And my husband told me I was very lucky to have the kindergarten teacher I did. So now this is going to be, this part is not research. This is personal anecdotes, and I've been talking to people from different countries. In Sweden, the goal for children before formal schooling is participation. That is, children should learn to be cooperating members of a group. If I've got any of these wrong, you'll just talk to me later. In Switzerland, the goal is developing social skills. In France, it's learning to eat properly. In Australia, it's learning appropriate behaviors that the Queen would approve. In Spain, in the Basque region, it's becoming trilingual. But in the United States, it's developing academic skills, preferably ahead of the other children. So you as parents have become besieged in the last 20 years with pressure to start teaching children young. We have all these things that are sold to parents for children 3 and under, children 3 and up. So flashcards that you could use with your 3-year-olds, books on the best educational toys for children 4 years and older. We even have stands, yes, for iPads that you can put on your baby's rocker that holds him so that he can start learning Mozart early. It's true. Expectations of U.S. teachers are also changing. So most recently, just in the last 10 years, now most U.S. kindergarten teachers, that is, teachers of children 5 and 6, think children should be able to read before they leave kindergarten. We used to think it was fine to read, at least if you'd read by the end of the 2nd grade or 3rd grade, at least by the age of 10. So this leads to a lot of didactic instruction. So didactic instruction means teacher-led, direct instruction to children. I found this in a classroom in Memphis, Tennessee. This is their schedule for sight words and nursery rhymes. So week by week, the unit would be My Family, and the sight words for that week were have and I, and they did Little Miss Muffet. Yes, you couldn't make this up. But when they get to farm, they actually have there, pink, made, are. These are for 4-year-olds. So this is another example of didactic instruction. So it leads to a lot of, again, not terrible interest on the part of the children, as you see from this child over in the corner, but a lot of intensity by the part of the teachers. But when you look at research for learning in young children, what we know is that direct instruction like that can actually limit young children's learning. Teaching is a very effective way to get children to learn something specific. So if you want them to practice their ABCs, then you teach them specifically what the letters are and have them practice. But direct instruction also makes children less likely to discover unexpected information and to draw unexpected conclusions. There's a woman in Chapel Hill, actually, Barbara Fredrickson, who talks about broaden and build, meaning if you broaden the learning environment, children build connections and make and develop a deeper sense of the world and how things work than they do in this very specific instruction. And this is a quote from a woman, Alison Gropnik, who's done this work. "It's more important than ever to give children's remarkable, spontaneous learning abilities free rein. That means a rich, stable, and safe world with affectionate and supportive grown-ups and lots of opportunity for exploration and play, not school for babies." But this U.S. approach, sadly, is spreading to other countries. It's especially taken up by countries with greater wealth disparities and no universal child care support for parents. Funding goes to targeted programs for children of the poor, and the focus is often remedial. There's no way I could resist showing at least one graph. I think I have two graphs. I really love graphs, and you're very lucky that I'm only using two. But this work that I'm going to show you comes from this very important relationship that we have developed between the people here in Child and the people in Portugal, where we've used the same observational instrument, which is what we call a behavioral count instrument. And why is that important? It's because instruments that rate what's going on in a classroom are inherently culturally biased. So whatever culture developed the rating system, it's determining what is to be rated as better or worse. But if you're just counting what's going on, if you're just looking at what's actually happening, you can make much better international comparisons. So I'm going to show you a graph where we have compared Portugal, the United States, and Sweden on two aspects of the way time is spent in classrooms for 3 and 4-year-olds. All right, so it's going to be here we go. All right, so what you see, this is whole group instruction, like this didactic instruction that I showed you, whole group instruction coupled with transitions in terms of the way time is spent. So you'll see in Portugal and the United States, more than half the time the children are in classrooms, they're either in whole group instruction or in transitions, whereas that happens only 20% of the time in Swedish classrooms. Free play, on the other hand, is just the reverse. So it happens 20% or less in Portugal and the US, and it happens more than 50% of the time, 60% of the time in Swedish classrooms. This is quite a difference in terms of the way you think, what you think the experiences of young children should be before they have, quote, formal instruction. So this stress in U.S. children starts early and is now a great and increasing problem. I thought I'd throw in a lot of pictures of stressed children. So in 2004, we had a month-long class that was held at Vanderbilt where we had instructors from the Transatlantic Consortium, so they were from Portugal and Germany and Sweden, and we also had doctoral students from those various countries. And it was a fascinating experience because you got shared perspectives among the faculty who often might not have been aware how differently they saw things, and you got then shared perspectives from the students. And this is a quote from that time. I had presented about the Head Start program in the US, which is a remedial targeted program for children of the poor, for 4-year-old children, and you have to be quite poor as a family to qualify for the program. And so it's meant to, what it says is it's meant to level the playing field before children go to school, so they will enter with the same information and knowledge and skills that other students from more affluent families have. And this is in response to that presentation. She said, "Why does the U.S. spend so much money trying to fix the problem instead of fixing the source?" I'll just leave you with that thought. Well, I will say that yesterday at the train station, what we saw was your large, wonderful pieces of, which I would have put in here if I'd had time. And the first one says "No Poverty." Do you know what those are? Well, I'm not sure where they're from, but there were 17 different, looks like principles or goals for the country. So Alice Walker is a very famous writer in the U.S. She wrote The Color Purple. She won the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. She says, "I had 7 brothers and sisters, and not one of them became the person they should have been because of poverty, because of racism, because of poor diet and drugs, because of the war." So there are consequences of this academic focus. There are many consequences. I'm only going to talk about one. Let me back up just for a second. We have done a lot of work following these children who've had this kind of program, a targeted program for children from poor families with this didactic instruction to prepare them for school. And I've actually found that by the time they get into 3rd and 6th, by the time they get into 3rd grade, they're actually doing worse than children who had stayed home academically. And by 6th grade, it's increasingly poor achievement on their part. But I'm going to talk about another thing. So if you're going to put children in this sort of academic situation, it results in much less outdoor time. So much of the free play you saw in the Swedish slide was actually outdoors. Of the 160 classrooms I studied 2 years ago for 4-year-olds, 45% had no outdoor or indoor playtime during the day. And they lasted 7 hours a day. So there was 7 hours for 4-year-olds, never went outside and never went to an indoor gym. The whole group instruction that we tallied could last 40 to 50 minutes at a time. As you can imagine, keeping young children still and inactive required a lot of behavioral control. And what our research has shown is that associative interactions are actually linked long-term to both positive social and cognitive outcomes. So more pictures just to take a little break. So this is pictures of associative play outdoors. Outdoor play is fun, it develops other skills. But the teachers explained to me, when we asked them why children were not going outside, they said it was too cold or it was too hot. And just as an aside, I actually had my observers take the temperature and record the temperature when they went down to observe next time. But anyway, however, I think this is another Swedish quote: "There is no such thing as bad weather, right? Only bad clothes." And this is my grandson, having a great time outdoors in very hot, 93 degrees, which I'm not even sure what that would be in centigrade. You probably don't even measure that high. Anyway. I'm going to split this into two. So I have actually spent 40 plus years observing and researching classrooms for young children. We've done a lot of work with the observation system that we talked about, that I've talked about, that people in child are also using. And we've tried to look at how what we measure in the classroom relates to outcomes for children. So let's talk about what we have found after this 40 years are important. One, you would say this is not rocket science. Everybody, except I want to tell you how infrequently we see really positive interactions in the classroom. Primarily what we see are very flat affect. Teaching apparently is a very serious business, and one shouldn't smile about it. But the more positive, the more smiling that happens, the better children learn. We rarely see vibrant, this is an illustration of. So the other one is more behavior approving, less behavior disapproving. So what do we mean by that? Well, behavior approving basically is whatever you're doing as a 4-year-old, keep doing it. It's great. Keep doing it. It's just whatever you're doing is fine. Behavior disapproving is whatever you're doing, I would like you to do something else. So I'm a 4-year-old, I'm going to the block area, and my teacher says to me, you've been to the block area 4 times this week. How about you come over here and you read a book? So it's redirecting children and saying, whatever you're doing, don't do it. And we have really strong evidence from a number of different studies that the less behavior disapproving is linked to gains in achievement. And more behavior approving is linked to gains in self-regulation, which I'll come back to. And fewer behavior reminders are linked to gains in self-regulation. So you just have to think about this for a minute or two to realize why that would be true. So the more the teacher is in control of your behavior, the less internal regulation you develop. So it reminds me when my daughter was 7 and she was asthmatic, and she got up from the table and didn't take the pill that she had taken every night of her life for the last 3 years. And I said, not my best parenting moment, I can't believe it, Alice. I can't believe you take this every day. How could you get up and forget it? She said, I don't have to remember. And she was right. I remembered for her. So the more behavior regulation that teachers are doing, the less internal control children are developing. Oddly enough, more math, not just because we're in a STEM era or whatever it's called, but actually there are reasons why math activities and being engaged in math really help children's development. I've got to keep track of my time. So what we know from several studies now is that the more children are engaged with math, the greater gain they make in self-regulation. So both self-regulation and math are related to the frontal cortex. I should get Dido to come and talk to me. And they seem to be developing simultaneously, so each helps the other. So actually, if you want your children to be more self-regulated, get them more engaged in math. Children have to have the opportunities to be engaged with math, not through didactic adult-led instruction, but including math in everyday activities and including math in talk and interactions with parents or teachers. I'm now a member of another network of 11 research universities. It's called the DREAM Network, like the basketball team, Development Research in Early Math Education, DREME, if you're interested. And we have a whole website of things that parents and teachers can do to engage children more in math. Okay, child environments. I'm doing okay on time? Yep. Child environments must be places where interesting things happen and children are engaged. So this is part of the things that Mats was talking about. We can run these classrooms, but when you start looking at how much children are interested in what's going on, not much. So it almost doesn't matter. I mean, you know yourself, if you began reading a book to your child and they're looking around, and you can't claim that child is listening to you reading a book, right? So how much the child is engaged in what's going on is really critical. I just had to throw this in, just out of a sense of loss. Anyway. But look at the child, look at the boy's face. I mean, he's practically biting his tongue. He's so interested in what he's doing, that he's just leaning forward, his tongue is out, he's really critically involved. And this is the sort of thing you want to see in classroom environments. You want to see children really engaged. And now I get to the critical one. Teachers should listen more to children. Well, of course you say. Well, let me show you the data. This is data we took during morning learning opportunities. So it's not during nap, not during mealtime. And And teachers are talking. This is a different kind of graph from the one before. This is a pie graph. So teachers are talking. Oh, I don't have. Oh, yes, I do. Is this what this is? Yes. So teachers are talking 71% of the time, which is astounding. I mean, you're just awash in teacher talk. To a child, 35% of the time. To a small group, 7%. To whole group, 25%. To self, 1%. Like, I need to go check the weather. To another teacher, 2%, and so forth. But look at how much they're listening, 9%. Now, why is that important? Well, because 4-year-olds are not developing in exactly a lockstep manner. If you've had a 4-year-old, what you know is, what your 4-year-old knows and is interested in and is trying to make sense of the world is quite different from what another 4-year-old is doing and interested in and trying to make sense of the world. You can't know that as a teacher unless you listen to children. Your teaching is not going to be effective unless you've actually listened to children and are synchronized with what they are making sense, how they are making sense of the world. But we're reaching a point where all adults need to talk less and listen more to children. I've done talks on this. I'm very concerned about it. We have the dangers of the new media. So for the first time, we have middle and higher income parents actually appear to be listening less to their children. Mom, could you push us, please? One second. This may hit home to some people. Or the new dinner time interactions. No one's listening to the children. No one's talking. So if I'm thinking about an effective, I want to talk about characteristics of an effective adult with children. These principles derived from a situation where I was teaching another person how to use my system and take data in classrooms, and I was very unhappy about what was going on. But if you're there taking data, you have to be poker-faced. That is, very flat. You can't reflect that you're concerned about what you're seeing or anything. But you can write, which I was doing very fast. And so when we got out, this woman said to me, she was new to classroom, so she said, so what do you think should make an effective classroom? Well, the 4 things I'm going to show you also derive from the data that I talked about. One is that teachers and adults and family need to be in the moment with children. So this is part of what we talk about. Involves listening to children. So being in the moment, you can only be there if you're truly attending to and listening to what children are doing, listening to what they're asking you, having more than two-turn conversations. We'll have teachers who will say, what do you think about this? The child will say something, then she'll go to the next one, the next one, the next one, and the next one. So there's no sustained conversation where she actually learns more about what the child is thinking. You need to show respect for children. That is, you need to respect their individuality. And you need to figure out as the teacher how to make what you want to do and how you want to lead the child fit with what the child's interests are. It isn't to say that the child leads us completely, but it is that there's an interaction so that you're respectful of what the child is bringing and you try to fit what you want, how you want the child, what you want the child to learn and how you want the child to proceed developmentally. You fit it with what the child brings to you. You need to take joy in children's behavior. You know, we see so many classrooms where the affect is so flat, where there's rarely a time of laughter, of enthusiasm, of excitement. And those are the kinds of environments, and you can make them in classrooms. Those are the kind of classroom environments you would want your own child in, that you yourself would have wanted to be in. And we need to treat children's learning as an intellectual puzzle. That is, how do we think about this? I mean, children are completely intriguing, but only if we're really attending to them. So, in conclusion, this is the chorus of that song that I started with. This is what Ralph wrote. We're all just seeds in God's hands. We start the same, but where we land is sometimes fertile soil, it's sometimes sand. And so if you're interested in this song, the song is Seeds, that's the name of it, S-E-E-D-S, and it's by Ralph Murphy, M-U-R-P-H-Y. Singer Kathy Mattea made it a #1 hit in the 90s. But around the world, then, we must take care to keep the soil fertile so that children can flourish. Developmental evidence, as I've shown you today, helps, but so do values. And I fear that in some cases we're beginning to lose our values for young children and our sense of how much we care about them and should nurture them. And that's it.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
You were so fast. Great presentation, thank you. So, unlike the presentations by the professors, in this case we actually get the opportunity to ask questions. So, if anyone would have a question for Dale, you'd be most welcome to ask. And if no one we have a question here.
Yes,
okay,
sir.
So there will be a mic coming over to you.
Thank you. This is a beautiful presentation. I very much enjoyed it. Speaking as a fellow Tennessean, I was born in Johnson City.
There you go.
And I was aware of some of the data from Tennessee coming out in the early learning programs. So this is kind of I always explain that, well, it's the wrong kind of early program. That's why the results weren't so good. But I'm not sure that's what you're saying. So, but the early data shows that children from impoverished backgrounds live in an environment that's very impoverished verbally as well. The language that they're exposed to is totally shrunk compared to a middle class or upper class home. So are you saying we shouldn't be doing those things, or how do you? Yeah, is the question clear?
No, that's a great question, and I could do a whole other presentation just on that. So I'll be careful, you will stop me. I think it's a really important question. I think we have not been nuanced enough about what's really happening to children. So let's take, for instance, your characterization of what happens to poor children. That characterization, if it's going to be accurate, is probably more accurate in high-density housing areas in urban areas. When you get to rural areas, children typically have a lot more freedom. That is, they're able to be outside and run around and interact with other children and so forth. So first of all, poverty is not poverty, depending on what the context is. And not to get too complicated, but I have a doctoral student, now at Stanford, marvelous, who looked at the children who went to the Tennessee pre-K program from the most impoverished neighborhoods. That is, the highest crime rates, the highest unemployment, the lowest income, compared to the children who stayed home in those neighborhoods. They did better if they went to pre-K. So it's what we call the counterfactual. It's what would happen to you if you were not in the pre-K program that we need to pay attention to. But I also think that we are headed toward that one of the consequences of having targeted programs is it creates a we-them sort of an idea on the part of teachers. They feel that they're not nearly so responsive to or accountable to parents. They feel there's a tendency, which is almost impossible to avoid, that they're providing something that children don't have otherwise. And so I think the way we're running those programs is a problem in general. It's not just about where the children came from, but I think there's a problem in terms of how didactically we're now running those programs.
Do you have more questions from the audience? Okay. Mike will come over to you. Yeah. Or you can do that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my question is about the sustainability goals. I think that the goal number 4, it's about education. And I was really happy when I saw that pre-primary education was for the first time mentioned in those kind of conventions. But actually, I'm a little bit worried because when speaking about pre-primary, it seems like there's a focus on academic learning and not on social learning or other things similar to that. And at the same time, inclusion is mentioned. How could we get play into the world of those international conventions and not only academic learning?
What? Yeah, no, I think that the word pre-primary has become defined as academic, and I think that's really a shame because that's just sort of one aspect of the many things children are developing. Creativity, interest, complex language, curiosity. I mean, those are the things that actually sustain learning through the later grades. There are only 26 letters in the alphabet, so just learning them early doesn't actually help you that much. But somehow we've gotten really focused in on this as though it was an academic preparation that is needed and not a social preparation.
So the next step would be to develop those conventions further and
Yes.
not only focus on academic learning, because we are talking about the future. Who's going to
Yes.
take over the future? They need both.
I agree.
Yeah.
But the problem is that the word play has also been misused to mean unfettered, a Piagetian approach of the children will create all the environment for themselves, and that's not accurate. And so we need another word that we can use for what we need to have happen with young children. Yes.
For a great presentation. I think that when you showed us the pie chart with the teachers talking that much and actually that they didn't listen that much, I think it goes very much into nursing as well, concerning nurses towards patients. And then you said that how to become the characteristics of an effective adult with children and to show respect and to how to approach the children in a good way. But how do you really learn that? How do you teach the preschool teachers to get this behavior?
Okay, that's a great question too. And so yes, we actually the problem with curriculum and selling curricula, which is what's happening big time in the U.S. at least, is that's all about teachers learning what to teach, not necessarily how to be in the classroom. So we have funding from the National Science Foundation now to develop a new kind of app, which is a web-based portal. I practice that, web-based portal. And it includes many of the things, well, all of these things that I just told you, plus 3 others. And some people call it the Magic 8, but it's all about the kinds of things I just showed you. And it is to help coaches identify those things in classrooms and help teachers develop them. Coaches themselves, when you have coaches in classrooms, often don't know what to look for, and they look for sometimes the wrong things. And so this will be ready in 2020. And so we're trying to develop a system where coaches would have a better sense about how these classrooms should be for children.
So being the moderator, I will take the opportunity to ask one last question.
Okay, all right.
So maybe I will come across as a very insensitive economist here. I'm clearly not in this field, but one thing that is being very discussed in Sweden right now is that Swedish children perform poorly in tests that are sort of with international comparisons. So
Not as bad as the U.S. Just think of that. I mean, it's better, you know.
I'm just thinking because to a certain extent, the Swedish system is sort of presented a bit as standing out from the rest a little bit. So I'm thinking, could it be the case that too little of this could be a concern too?
Well, personally, I would look at what happens when to your schooling system. So, for example, I've also collected a lot of data in the early grades of school. So for us, it would be called kindergarten, first and second grade, and there's a lot of redundancy in the instruction. I don't think the kind of foundation for more rigorous learning is being set early by the teachers there. So rather than looking at the preparation before going into school, I would actually begin to look at what's happening in school, especially in those early grades. That's my preference.
Thank you. So I know that you have come here to get a hat, but we also got a little bit some other things here.
Oh my goodness!
You didn't think about the hoodie, but we got one of those too. And
oh, it's
two
very
boxes.
kind. Thank you so
much for a great presentation.
Thank you very much. This is wonderful.